Good morning, Vietnam! All right, I got that out of my system. Welcome to the Vietnam panel. This is a pretty special panel this year. We have four guys who were in the Mekong Delta in 1969. And I'll introduce them in a second. 1969 was the most intense year in Vietnam. We took the highest American casualties. We discovered years later Hanoi was on the ropes. They were on the verge of calling the White House and asking for terms when the Nixon White House called them. And they went, geez, we got them. We just have to hold on. And so we eventually got to the peace that we got, the fall of Saigon, the exit event. But 69, we were there, 537,000 troops. We had in the, I'm going to share a screen here with you guys. In Dong Tam, we had this giant base camp, 3 miles long, a mile wide, every conceivable weapon. We had a paved runway, we had every kind of helicopter, we had 105, 155, and 175 cannon. We dug this deep water harbor so that full naval warships could come in and anchor off the Mito branch of the Mekong River. We had an air-conditioned library, we had hot showers, and we had 15,000 heavily armed men, a full division, the 9th Infantry Division. So we all came through at one time or another, and actually I think all of our speakers today were probably within anywhere of a mile to a few hundred feet of one another, but none of us knew it. Now, I know two of the speakers, and I'm going to introduce them in a minute. But first, my name is Lawrence Dolph. I was in Dong Tam providing security for the base, which meant I was on night ambush patrol. I'd go out every night with 10 other guys, one squad, and we try to interdict the Viet Cong that would rocket the place every night. We never saw them. But they always knew where we were, and they could attack whenever they wanted. And so one night we faced the uncomfortable position of having 400 Viet Cong marching in our position with 11 guys. We couldn't move. And all we could do was stay there and fight. Fortunately, it was the first day of the monsoons. The heavens opened up. It was like standing under Niagara Falls, and the war was called on account of rain, which is why I'm here today talking to you guys. So I did night ambush patrol. We took 2-3 casualties every night from snipers and booby traps. Replacements were there at noon. We went out again. This was not my favorite job, I have to tell you. So that's enough about me. Now let me introduce Ben Cunningham, who has a very, very interesting exposure in Vietnam, running from his infantry days in '69 all the way to when he went back as a civilian to get his people out in '73 as Saigon was falling. And he got his people on an airplane, a commercial airplane, and running down the runway. The plane behind was blown up by the North Vietnamese who were overrunning the city, and Ben was on the last plane out. So I don't want to tell his story because he tells it a hell of a lot better. Ben, why don't you tell us what you did?
Well, are you going back to 1969 right now?
Yes.
Okay. My job was I had been at well, let me put it this way. The Army had sent me to a cold weather survival school in Alaska, and as soon as I got back from cold weather survival school in Alaska, I got orders to report to Fort Eustis, Virginia, to go on without any kind of notice of what was going on. And I got to Fort Eustis, and turns out it was part of a classified unit that was about 20 people, and it was a chopper unit, and and I was not a chopper pilot. I was did other things, but it turns out that the whole little unit kind of was there to serve me. And my main job when I first got to Vietnam in 1969, July of 1969, was we were headquartered at the airfield in Vung Tau, and from there I would be flown out to various different places to do various different things. But if you really want to know the truth, it was me trying to gather intelligence, and so I was looking and finding and creeping and crawling, and I'd go out they'd drop me off 2 days a day, 2 weeks, whatever, and I had John Grow was the captain of the unit, and he was, and we had 2 other helicopter pilots. We had Loaches, we had Hueys, and we had a Cobra. And so my main job the first year I was there in Vietnam, I was there ultimately for a few years, but my main job was to gather intelligence, B, as a military advisor to South Vietnamese Army and Ranger units, and all of this was tied to what's called Vietnamization. We were there to start turning the war over to the South Vietnamese.
Excellent. So while you were out there in the bush spying on them, in Dong Tam, we were employing the civilians at generous wages to do various tasks for us in the base. So our barber was a Viet Cong colonel who would cut hair and then come out, take a cigarette break, pace a few steps, and count his steps and note his azimuth, his direction, because he was going to improve the accuracy of the rockets coming that night. The guy, I will say, gave one hell of a good haircut, to his credit. So we had women working in all over the base, and they were the sisters and cousins of the Viet Cong, so they were giving rich flows of information to the Viet Cong. Every time we had a patrol coming off the base, there'd be a woman hoeing her farm, completely legitimate, right outside, and she was the signal that we were deploying people. So they knew everything about us. The only thing we knew about them, Ben, I think, is what you and your cohorts could discover. Now, to keep this moving, I want to introduce Denny here, and bear with me a second. I have a here. So Denny was a helicopter section commander in Vietnam. He flew everything. I'm not going to get into that because he'll tell you. He is a life member of the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association, a past general counsel secretary, board member of the Distinguished Flying Cross Society, because Denny has a Distinguished Flying Cross, not to mention 2 silver stars, a bronze star, and I don't know how many air medals for valor. Oh my God, man. Denny is currently a director of the San Diego Veterans Museum and Memorial Center, where he chairs the Combat Military Nurse Support Unit. And with that introduction, and I am not worthy, I give you Denny.
Well, first, hello, Michigan, and the rest of the country, because I know that there are folks from around. You mentioned the DFC Society. That's based here in San Diego. And a shout out to all the DFC Society members, over 3,000 in the country, and for their service, including the most recent Afghanistan situation. I want to dedicate my comments today, tie into some points I'll try to make, to a boy from Michigan. And his name is John Stokerman. And John got into Vietnam as a Warrant 1. He was a young pilot. At that time, the Army in '69 had the largest air force in the world, inclusive, of course, of the helicopters that were there. The program for getting pilots together for that service involved an aptitude test and a flight physical. the aptitude test that we took asked how many speeding tickets have you had, how many accidents have you had, have you operated motorcycles, questions like that, which I fully identified with all of those things. And I thought, my God, I'm not going to get in. Well, that's exactly what they're looking for. And then, of course, the second thing, you had to pass the physical exam, which leads me to the environment for the pilot selection. 70% of the pilots in Vietnam flying helicopters were warrants. Most of them were 19 to 21 years of age. I was commissioned through ROTC. I went through a mandatory 2-year ROTC at University of Wisconsin because it was a land grant university. And I stayed in for the additional course and got my private license fixed wing through the military when I was an undergrad. And the day I graduated, I had my graduation service, and then I got commissioned and I got my orders PCS, Republic of Vietnam. Pending going through Armor Officer Basic, and then secondarily primary flight school in Texas and advanced flight training. I went to Hunter. Most of the guys went to Fort Rucker. But when I got to Vietnam, I was assigned to the 7th of the 1st Air Cavalry, which was a squadron that had been sent down to Bien Long. And that's right on the tributary, the middle tributary of the Mekong River, and situated in the center of a lot of activity that was going on down there. Stokerman, also known as Stokes, died in combat, and he served about 5 months there, and he was one of my scout pilots, because as a commissioned officer, I actually had responsibility as a flight section commander for 8 aircraft and crew, and I was 24 years of age. I had to go through his personal effects when he was killed, and I had to decipher what should be sent back to his family and what not. And then our commanding officer did the letter, signed off on the letter that I prepared to his family. So I have never forgotten him. I think about him frequently. We lost a lot of other guys too, but what stood out was he was a warrior, and he was really a fun guy and a very good pilot. And as a result of his death, you know, we talk about him on reunions. We get together. I actually found the location for the Vietnam Wall is, he is, small print here, 16W-020. He died in the Sadek province. So he is a Michigan boy, buried in Kalamazoo, and I'm dedicating my time on this program to John's memory.
Well, that's terrific. So we have, last but hardly least, Joe Schwartz, in Vietnam in '65 as a naval surgeon while working with the Marine Corps in the field. But for the purposes of today's panel, he was back in 1969 working for the CIA, the company. And Joe, tell us what you know. Tell us what you can. It's not embargoed.
Well, that first tour was as a battalion surgeon for a Marine Battalion 2-1, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment in I Corps. I went from there to be assistant naval attaché in Indonesia during a revolution there, and then was recruited by the company and went to Laos for a while, and then back down to Vietnam, and all over the country. I think I was in every province of the former Republic of South Vietnam, and doing intelligence work and special ops work for the company. Enjoyed it all, and would do it again if it ever occurred to the company to want to hire an old guy to do it. I don't think they will. So in any event, I'm happy about it. I'm proud of my time there, and my total time in Southeast Asia between 65 and 70 was almost the whole 5 years.
Wow. So I want to show you guys a map of Vietnam that explains a lot. this stuff was not understood at the time that we were there, but, all right, where's my map? There we go. I don't know if anybody, you guys can see the cursor, but anyway, way up here in the north, just below China, you've got Hanoi and the Haiphong Harbor. You've got this long, narrow country that we were trying to divide at the 17th parallel toward the Korea solution. The idea was in the south we would have an industrial democracy and we would militarily enforce that line. They weren't having it. And so they had these invasion routes that came through Cambodia. Those are the red marks that hopefully everybody can see. And they could bring down infinite numbers of supplies, ammunition, men and women. They used women long before we did in combat roles, very effectively. And so you can see that wherever we were trying to fight north, we were constantly being assaulted on our flank. And you go all the way down to the bottom of this map in the Mekong Delta, which is where the four of us were, they were behind us as well. In 1968, the Tet Offensive was devastating to the Viet Cong, we were all told. The Viet Cong ceased to exist, we were all told, but somehow the guys behind us didn't get the memo. So when I look at this map, I think, my God, this was an 8-year charge of the Light Brigade. This was a war that probably couldn't be won. And if command or the president had seen this map before they devoted all those resources, they might have thought differently about what they did. But I got to tell you, we fought with everything we had, and we were very fierce. Our kill rate was the same as in the first Gulf War, 100 to 1. We killed 100 enemy for every one of us that we lost. Just astonishing. And so we have individual stories I want to break to now. Ben, are you ready? Is this, I'll get off this map and get back to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Laurie. Denny reminded me of something. I want to give one additional Michigan tribute since I'm here. My door gunner, helicopter mechanic, and best friend and comrade in arms the first year I was in Vietnam, name was Jim Kulchek. And Jim was a terrific soldier. And he and I,
Can you,
on
you
your
all see
screen.
that? That's Ben on the left as you look at the screen. That's Jim on your right.
And so this particular picture was taken actually the second year I was in Vietnam. This picture was the day after a bar that we had been in the night before got blown all to hell. I may get to that story in a minute, but the main thing I want to talk about right now is this war, our war, is still killing people. Jim Kulchek died about 3 years ago from effects of Agent Orange. He lived in Traverse City, Michigan, and I went up to Traverse City for his funeral and memorial service. I still have some of his ashes sitting here next to me on a bookcase. But one of the things that I can tell you is hundreds of thousands of veterans from Vietnam are still suffering and dying from effects of Agent Orange. So that's what I wanted to say about Jim Kulchek.
Yeah, I think their number is at least 300,000 have died of Agent Orange to date. I believe that's right, which is 10% of the entire force that went over 8 years.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And I'm a victim of Agent Orange. I had no symptoms until 5-6 years ago. It began to kill the electrical system of my heart. However, this being Michigan, we put in a pacemaker and turbocharged it, and I am fine. But you know, it affected a lot of people. Ben, do you want to keep going, or you want to hand off here?
Well, let me. First of all, let me tell you another thing you reminded me of, Laurie. I don't know if it was the same barber or not, but Jim Kulchek and I caught the barber in the airfield in Vung Tau doing the same thing. And so that was not that. I think barbers must have been their best intelligence people for pulling in, marking off and pulling in all of the mortar fire that we kept getting. So anyway, that's that. The first year I was there in Vietnam, as I said, I was taken out to the jungles, dropped and picked up later. Fortunately, and I know that there's some real heroes in this little panel. I don't count myself in that, but the first year I was there, I got a really, really, really minor, insignificant wound, going, crawling under concertina wire out in the jungles, and didn't pay much attention to it. It got infected. I kept getting worse. They finally packed me up on a chopper and sent me to some little Jake Leg Field Hospital in the Delta. I don't even know where. And got there, and the doc was looking at me, and he said, here's the good news and bad news. He said, what do you want first? And I was halfway delirious. I didn't care. And he said, well, the good news is that you're going to get to go home from the war. And the bad news is we're sending you out to Yokota, Japan tomorrow to get your left arm amputated. And so I'm laying on a cot in this little field hospital. Field hospital was probably about maybe 1,200 square feet of hastily erected space. And I decided I wasn't going to go have my arm cut off. So I walked out of that hospital, field hospital, and started making my way back to where I thought where the last place that I had been was, which was a little base camp somewhere in the Delta. And I made it. I don't know how many clicks, but I finally collapsed. I was going through a relatively friendly village, collapsed. The last thing I remembered was Vietnamese packing my shoulder wound with some foul-smelling seaweed or something. I was out for a few days, and when I came to and finally made it back to my unit at the time that I was temporarily assigned to, I walked in, and they looked like they'd seen a ghost. And what had happened was, I found out that the night that I walked out of the field hospital, the hospital got hit and was totally obliterated by rocket and mortar fire, and everybody in that little field hospital died. And they had already sent word home to my family that I was missing and presumed killed in action. And they tried to give me a Purple Heart, and I wouldn't take it, because there were people that really got hurt in that war, and mine was a little tiny accident. I wasn't expecting it, didn't want it, and so yeah. But somehow or another, I wound up surviving that, and I've still got my left arm. So yeah, so that's one little tale.
Hell of a story. So Denny, yeah, one of the things that distinguished your service is flying the Loach, which is agile and fast. You'd come in under heavy fire and you'd evacuate wounded servicemen in ones and twos under heavy fire. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I wanted to at least cite it as a real act of heroism.
And I'd just like to clarify the record. I think you may have looked at an old CV. I did serve on the Veterans Museum in San Diego for 10 plus years. It's a wonderful museum. If you come out to San Diego, I encourage you to see it up in Balboa Park. I'm the chairman of the Miramar National Cemetery Support Foundation, our most active cemetery here in San Diego, and have a wonderful board. And we're doing 18 to 20 tournaments a day now.
Wow.
In San Diego, so a lot of Vietnam vets. But I perhaps maybe the bigger picture would be for the audience that isn't familiar. When I mentioned air cavalry, that's a very unique unit. In our squadron was strictly combat. We had no resupply duties, no VIP flying. Our job was to go out and find the enemy and to take them on, particularly as that map showed. There's an area. In fact, Laurie, if you could put up your map again and point.
You
to
bet. Here it comes. Give me.
the Parrot's Beak.
Wait one.
If we can pull that up. But the Parrot's Beak, you'll see in there. There you go. And you can zero in down there just to the left.
I'm moving my cursor if people can see it.
Right there. And you see how irregular, almost triangular shape that penetrates into South Vietnam. You can imagine with jungle terrain, in those signs, there's no real description of where is Cambodia and where is South Vietnam. And that was a heavy area of penetration by the enemy into the Delta area. And so it was a real, we were constantly out in that zone and then all the way down to the tip down by Cam Isle there on the map. But you can take it off now.
Okay. The smart-ass story was we didn't invade Cambodia, we just had bad maps.
Well, that's in my time, that's pretty true. But let me just discuss what a combat air assault with an air cav unit consisted of in 1969. There's a horrible movie, some may have liked it, Apocalypse Now. And you recall the scenes with Robert Duvall and the people buzzing around. That was an air cav operation and probably based on some true characters. But you'll recall the famous saying.
There you go, Danny. That's Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, the Valkyrie music comes on. But
Right of the Valkyries.
Yeah, the famous saying is, God, I love the smell of napalm in the morning. Well, that was a view of the air cav operation in the Delta. But typically, the air cav unit had 4 platoons. We had the lift section, which were the H model Hueys for us, which is the most powerful Huey that we had in Vietnam at that time, much more powerful than what we trained on, which were the B and D models. And then we had the H-1G Cobra. And I'm going to show you a couple of pictures here of the aircraft. Let's go to 2-1 to begin with. Okay, you'll see here, this is a trail formation of Hueys. And one of the things you'll notice is how much obscurement there is in the background. Well, in the dry season, we had tremendous fires from artillery and from use of explosives. We had a lot of smoke, and a lot of the insertions were really near instrument conditions. Extractions too, because of the visibility. Let's go to the next one, to 7-1. This is just a side view of one of our Hueys, and if you can't read the door sign, I thought it was very appropriate, and it kind of shares the thoughts that we had. It says, "My God, how'd we get in this mess?" Which we did ask ourselves on occasion. If we go to 8B. Okay, this is a side view of one of our Cobras, taken about 2,500 foot altitude, and you can see the nose art design. The Cobra was a real advancement in close-in support for ground troops Very, very full of armament and very fast. Let's go to 8A1. This is the business end of a Cobra. You can see the rocket pods, which fired 2.7 millimeter rockets on the side. And if you look down below the nose turret, we have a minigun, and we also have rocket launcher or grenade launchers. I did fly the Cobra some, but that was not my primary mission. This particular Cobra was flown by one of my buddies known as the Green Weenie. And these guys could come in and literally put suppressive fire within 100 yards of friendly troops and be right on. You could adjust fire by telling them this 100 yards from the smoke or whatever. So really, you know, an amazing group of pilots. A lot of them were warrants as well. And let's go to 9A1. That up? That happens to be me. Back at that time, I had dropped about 25 pounds from when I first got there. And that is a Hughes OH-6 Alpha, also known as the Loach, for light observation. And if you look towards the bottom right, you'll see part of the minigun that that aircraft carried. The pilot controlled the minigun from the pilot's seat on the right. We had a selector switch that gave us the ability to fire either 2,000 or 4,000 rounds per minute. And then we had a gunner, observer on the left side, and typically for that scout seat, for the observer seat, we had a punji cord, because you know we didn't have doors. We had a sliding panel for armament protection, lower level, but he'd have an M60 machine gun on a punji cord with the belt going over the back of his seat for close-in support. Some of them did elect, depending on the mission. They had we had shotguns, we had AR-15s for them, but most of them preferred the M60 just because of the suppressive fire of that M60 7.62 millimeters. So we can go off the picture now. So flying the Scout, typical mission with intel, and perhaps some of it from Bob. We got intel of infiltrations typically at night. We had the ability to use sensors along the border. We had special forces camps. We had SEAL teams that were operating all around that Parrots Peak without knowing that they were in or out sometimes of Cambodia. But we had intel that there was activity in a certain area. And so before daylight, we'd be setting up a base camp, maybe 15 minutes away from the area of operation. 2 scout ships would go out, what we sometimes referred to as snooping and pooping. And we'd go out and we'd start to look through the terrain. We would look in the canals. Sometimes you would see reeds bent over in the canals, and depending on how far the reeds had come back, you could estimate fairly accurately how long it had been since they'd passed through. Sometimes they would, as daylight approached, they would submerge the sampans down into the canals, might be 5 or 6 of them with all their gear and whatnot wrapped in waterproof bagging and cosmoline, and sink the sampans 15, 20 feet down using rocks, and then they would go into their bunker systems that were like, motels along the way from way back with the fighting of the French. So they had a lower infrastructure for security. Our job was to try to find them. So as a scout, sometimes what we'd do is we'd recon by fire, shoot a few bursts of where we thought they might be, and lo and behold, they'd start shooting back. So our job was to be a target. That's the bottom line, because that's how we would locate them. Once we located them, our job was not to continue to engage. It was to put smoke on the target area, bring the gunships in, let them do their job. We'd come back and do a sit rep. And if we're still drawing heavy fire, as opposed to finding a bunch of dead bodies, then what we would end up doing is calling for an insertion. And if we're going to insert an area, we would typically have with our own air cav unit, we had a 4th platoon of infantry that was commanded by an infantry officer. Some of them didn't have their wings and were pilots, but they were there to basically come in for instant action to try to secure an area, or if an aircraft went down, to secure it. So when the insertion was coming in, say it might be 4 lift helicopters, the scouts would locate the area that would be best for the insertion, describe whether they could land or not, put smoke out so you'd have wind for wind direction, and then immediately they would come in and insert, and they would depart. And if there was a hot LZ and we took casualties, the scouts, as you pointed out, Laurie, would come in immediately, and we do immediate extraction because we could get people to the facilities the quickest, and then a relief team would come on for the scouts. So that was a very common mission that we did many, many times.
A big deal I want to quickly comment. Since Ulysses S. Grant commanded the Federal Army in the Civil War, the overall strategy has been to find the enemy and kill them. And that's what General William Westmoreland was trying to do with his search and destroy missions and his body count. He was replaced in 1969 by General Abrams. But in any case, Denny, you were the only one who could find him. We're wandering around out there. I'm on the ground trying to find these guys. They knew where we were all the time. We could, and they could therefore engage us at their convenience on their ground to their advantage. We would go for days at a time with nothing but harassing fire, snipers, booby traps, and then suddenly a big battle. But I'm going to shut up now because I want to hear from Joe Schwartz about what you were doing with the company.
Well, the company in 1969 was an interesting outfit, and I started out in Laos, way up in northern Laos. Show them the map, would you?
Sure, you bet.
With a group of folks there at a place called Ban Hui Sai, which is on the Mekong River, going up in the north. You got your cursor.
I can't move it. Yeah,
Can't move it?
I can use the cursor.
Well, it's up on the Mekong River, across from Thailand.
Oh, up here.
Yeah.
Coming up here.
And we were trying to help the Lao loyalists who were fighting the Pathet Lao. And we had a small group, and there was a group of missionaries up there as well, who were Americans, who had a little facility where they treated Lao. And we made contact with them and talked to them, and they knew that I was a physician. And they came to us one day and said, there's a woman coming down with her husband down the Mekong River. She is in labor, and the baby won't come, and she's now been in labor for about 4 days. And I said, okay, and I talked to my guys, and we went back and waited, and they came down, sure enough, in a boat in the Mekong from God knows where, I don't know where. They were a member of the Yao YAO tribe, which is in northern Laos. And they were loyalists. They weren't supporting the Pathet Lao. And indeed, she was pregnant. Indeed, she was in hard labor. And indeed, nothing was happening. And it was very clear to me, having had a fair amount of obstetrical experience as a general surgery resident and as an intern, that either we delivered the baby or she would die and the baby would die. And we had a facility where we thought we could do it. Long story short, we had, again, the facility and we had the equipment to do it. It wasn't wonderful, but it was enough. I was able to put a spinal anesthetic in her, which worked. Was able to make a standard historic a cesarean section incision, pubis to umbilicus. Go in, open the uterus, get the baby out. The baby was okay. Deliver the baby, cut the cord, deliver the placenta, close the uterus, close the abdomen, and we had a place we could put her and keep her so that she was all right. And we kept her for about 8 or 10 days. And then down the hill they walked down to the Mekong River again, got in their boat, and up into the midst of the Mekong. I have no idea whatsoever whatever happened to that baby, but that's one of the things that I think God intervened on that day for that Lao couple and that Lao lady, and we were in the right place at the right time. We were able to save her life and bring a new life onto the earth, and that's just one of those stories you think will never, ever happen to you, but it did happen, and I love to tell it because it's a good story about that part of the world.
You have two questions too.
Okay, we got some questions coming in, and I'm going to recognize two of them. First, I want to tell one very quick thing about my unit. I was talking about blundering around on the ground. The company that I was assigned to had been wiped out. 187 men assaulted a wood line. The Viet Cong had been studying our tactics. Only 37 made it out alive. I was replacement. They didn't bother to tell me. So, but we were the new Army by that point. The draft had now reached out to college kids. I was one, a college graduate. So we were now a mixture of kids from badass neighborhoods, Ivy League playing fields. We had been educated in factories, and we had been educated by colleges, and we were essentially an interdisciplinary team. So 6 weeks after my company had been wiped out, they tried to do it again on us. They attacked us when we were in open ground with no cover, and within less than 30 minutes, we killed them all. Don't need to go into the blood and gore of the details, but we had figured out what they were doing, and we were on top of it. Now, let's take some questions. We got two. Phil?
The first one wanted to know about K rations and chow.
Ooh.
Like, I must be thinking about lunch already. So,
Yeah.
what was food like for you while you were in country?
Don't eat the scrambled eggs.
And it wasn't K rations then, it was C rations.
Sea ration.
Yeah.
Oh, and yeah, later maybe something kind of like LERP stuff, but it was all pretty bad.
Now,
Well-
we would take composition B, that was plastic explosive. We'd break off a little corner that probably was worth $100 or more. We'd let it on fire, it wouldn't explode, and it burned very hot, and you could heat up hot dogs and beans and have a decent meal. But don't step on it because it'll blow your leg off. Just let it burn out. Denny, you were going to say something?
Well, we used a little small empty can, put some dirt in it and JP4 fuel, and that's how we cooked our stuff. But I hated the lima beans and ham.
Oh, God, yes, that was horrible.
But I love the fruit cocktail, and we got cigarettes and chiclets in every box, and I didn't smoke, so I would barter my cigarettes for extra fruit cocktails. So I usually had 2 fruit cocktails for lunch. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
Dehydrated.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, when I was out tramping around, and by the way, Denny, I spent a lot of time in the Parrots Beak area, but I never cooked anything while I was out there. I choked down the rations, but that was it. But the other flip side of that was, and I don't know how it was at Can Tho, but anytime I could get back to Vung Tau, we had great food to eat. And it wasn't C rations. It was cooked food by Vietnamese indigenous personnel, as we call them. And but food was just fuel, and I really didn't think much about it except whenever I'd get a good meal.
Wow. So we've had a guy on this panel in past years by the name of Peter Dodge. He volunteered to be a medic in Vietnam, got trained at Fort Sam Houston, and although he had volunteered to go to Vietnam, they sent him to Thailand. His father had been a doctor in the Korean War, and therefore Pete had knowledge that not everyone had. And the upshot is that he one day medically condemned an entire pallet of steaks and an entire pallet of beer, and became the most popular man in his base. What's our other question?
The other question was really about the transition home, the
Well,
coming home part for you.
I think all 4 of us went to work, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I did not want to be one of those guys who was getting drunk for 6 months, so I had a job within 3 days. And it was a crappy job, was all that was available, but within, well, I don't know. I won't indulge in that story, but I moved fast. So I got hired as a proofreader by a giant publishing company in Ann Arbor. And about 4 days later, I was the assistant ad manager of the company. And within 4 months, I was the editor of a 50,000 circulation newspaper. So I went to work. Ben and Denny went to work. Ben, you went into law enforcement first.
Well, actually, my transition was a little bit longer because I got out in '71, but I went back to Vietnam to teach and work with a NGO organization, social welfare organization, and was over there. I didn't wind up coming back until 1972. And when I got back in '72, really all I was kind of interested in was finishing up my undergraduate education. And I had a journalism background. Even in the Army, one of my MOSs was 71Q, which was combat journalist. And so I came back to Houston and started finishing up school, and I was working for the Houston Chronicle as a kind of, I don't know, cub reporter, not a very important role, but yeah. And then after that, I did, before I went to law school, I went to joined the Harris County Sheriff's Department as a patrol deputy and hostage negotiator for about 7 years before I started law school. And once I got finished with law school, my entire career, as Denny will tell you, your life changes because, once a lawyer, once a doctor, always a lawyer or a doctor. So, yeah.
Denny, you were badly wounded, and you want to tell about what happened after that? Or tell about the day they shot you, for God's sakes. Because you got to talk about that. Do you have your helmet?
I can go into that, I guess. The day, which will be 52 years tomorrow, was November 11th of '69, and there was an area in South Vietnam that's further south, but still kind of in the center, called the U Minh Forest, which was truly a enemy sanctuary. In my time there, and I heard stories of what had happened in '67 and '68. There was never any control by us of that territory. It was bad news. If you wanted to have action, all you needed to do was screw around and penetrate the fringes of the U Minh. So we had drawn that operation, and we'd gone down, and that morning, one of our scout teams caught a bunch of sampans just at daybreak, making a beeline in a canal into the U Minh Forest, and they opened up and took out several sampans. They were loaded with gear and supplies and several personnel in each sampan. So I came on station to relieve so they could refuel. And the commanding officer at that time basically wanted where the enemy fire started to come from this tree line area identified for the gunship. So we flew over. I had actually gone to Vung Tau earlier in my time there and took my instructor pilot training. I was an IP for the Scouts, transitioning people into combat. And I had a Canadian pilot volunteer with me who I'd taken on a check ride the day before, an orientation, his very first day in combat. And we fly over and I tell him to drop the smoke, and he got the smoke off late. So I gave a indication to the Cobras. I said, you need to adjust flyer about 100 meters to the south of the smoke. They said, Roger that. Well, the commanding officer that we just gotten a fairly new commanding officer said negative, I want to smoke on the target. So I had to come back and I told the guy, this is not good. I said, I'm going to pick up the speed. When I say drop smoke, you drop smoke. So instead of doing the 50 to 60 knots, I was doing 70 to 80 knots. And when I got right on the target, just as I said, drop smoke, they opened up on us and hit the aircraft heavily. And I took a round through my left leg, it blew out my fibula. And I had a Nomex glove. I stuck my fist into my left leg to try to contain the bleeding, and I knew the aircraft was going down, so I banked to the right. There was an area that was a rice paddy and then a kind of a dike wall, and I was hoping to get close to that and get on the ground, but I was able to do that. Then the command and control ship actually came down and got on the dike, and they got me over to the aircraft and medevaced me, and the Canadian guy, you know, he had to leave the aircraft, so he got in too. But the medevac was over to Canto. They had a major hospital facility there. And let's see, if we go to the helmet shot, that's
The helmet's up.
okay. So this is a picture of the helmet I was wearing. At the time I took the round through the leg, I took a round through the helmet. This is a semi-ballistic helmet. And it's got bug ears because I had really good intercom capability, and I had a student with me, so I could talk to him much better. He could understand much better. And this helmet was a product that really did what it was designed for, and that was to cause a curvature and a change of path. And so the bullet follows the inner side of the helmet. There's some strap that's severed, and I do have a scar up here, and I've had some bleeding. And then it follows the curvature, goes into the cork and comes out the top, and you can see the top hole there. Actually, if you look at the helmet, it's about the size of a quarter. So I was taken back to Canto. I was told about the helmet. They wouldn't let me take it off. When they got me into the extraction helicopter, I guess they realized that it was doing something good, although they saw the blood. When I got to Canto about a day or two later, you know, I'd had surgery, debridement, and I was actually in and out of it because of morphine, but my commanding officer and the brigade commander came to visit me, and the commanding officer said, by the way, your wingman and his observer also took a round at that time through their helmets. And I couldn't actually even remember who the wingman was. And I never knew if the story was true. And then about 49 years later, a guy in Chula Vista read an article about the National Cemetery Program. My name was mentioned, Miramar here in San Diego. And he called in. He said, he was transferred to my number, and he said, are you the Lieutenant Scoville that served with the 7th, 1st Air Cav? And I said, yes, I was. He said, well, I've got a story to tell you. He said, do you remember what you said? And I said, yeah, I think I do. I said, I've been hit. He said, yes. And then there was a pause, and you said, and it's bad. So anyway, he and I met, and he sent along and brought a photograph, and let's bring that up. This is a photograph of Bobby Baker on the left, a warrant officer pilot, and Steve Brown, the guy without the shirt, the handsome guy on the right, and they're pointing to their helmets. And they're pointing to holes in their helmets. And what had happened was when I took the hits, they were my wingman, they were behind me to the right and about 75 feet higher altitude. Their job was to cover me whenever I made any turns, or in this instance, to try to get away. And so Steve leaned forward. He had an M60 machine gun, and he had to turn back to the left to try to provide suppressive fire to keep the bad guys from knocking me out of the sky further. And I was able to get to the right. And when he did that, he hit the cyclic stick on the observer's side. We had an option of having the cyclic stick in for the observer or not. And in my unit, I required that it be in there, and that the pilots train the observers whenever they had extra time, like refueling, to at least learn how to land the aircraft, how to hover. So if we were incapacitated or killed, at least they had a chance to get themselves on the ground. And so when they leaned forward, he hit the cyclic stick, and that caused that aircraft to nose down. The pilot was fighting to try to get control of the aircraft when the bullet came through the back of their two helmets. If they had been sitting up, they would have been dead. So I learned this 49 years later. I wanted to then find Bobby Baker. He was one of my men. A lot of Bobby Baker served in the military. Couldn't find him. And then finally I lucked out. I found a guy that was his roommate after Vietnam down at Fort Hood. And Bobby was one of those guys that when he got back, he was a W-2. He ended up getting a postcard from the Army saying, sign here and you get a direct commission. Oh, and by the way, you're going back to Vietnam. And he did that. So in 72, Bobby Baker was serving again now as the platoon leader of Scouts as a captain when he took a round in the stomach, and Bobby died in March of 72 in Vietnam, close to when he would have been coming back. And I located him of all places in San Diego at Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery.
Wow.
So
Denny, you were in the hospital, in and out of surgeries for 9 months, if I understand it right. And then you just went to law school and became a distinguished graduate. Is that correct?
Well, I actually was debating MBA or law school. I had taken the law LSAT before I graduated, hoping I might get a deferment. The Army said, no, we need pilots. You've gone through the flight program. And so I was able to actually meet with the dean of the law school. Although they were full, he said he'd keep me on the waiting list. And I got orders that I was going to be on what they called temporary disability retirement, subject to recall for another physical examination or whatnot. And I actually started law school. I got a call the first day of law school that they had an opening, and the admiral in charge of the hospital signed a convalescent order so I could start law school. And I was technically still a patient at the hospital. But I ended up going on to Chicago-Kent, Illinois Institute of Technology, graduated with a distinction. And then just as I was about to graduate, I got permanently retired by the Army as a captain. And I then went to Northwestern University in Chicago for my Master of Letters of Law, an LLM degree in international law.
So that's a hell of a transition. Now, Joe, one might think you transitioned when you joined the company. Were you with them for a long time, or did you transition after that?
I transitioned out of the company and went to Boston, to Harvard, and did my residency in ENT head neck surgery.
Isn't Harvard the Michigan of the East?
Yes, it is. I always felt that, and there were some people in Boston that didn't accept that, but the hell with them. We took care of it. But yeah, that's what I did, and then I went back to my hometown in Battle Creek and practiced and became mayor, and then a state senator, and then a member of Congress, and an interesting career. I've loved it, but a lot of transitions there.
Wow, that's impressive. So I'm glad that we got the transition question. What is not really understood about the Vietnam service is that 85% of us who came back pretty much acted like the World War II veterans, in that we got jobs, we got married, we had kids. A lot of us used our GI benefits to get more education. The upshot is 10 years after our war, 10 years after our war, we were better educated and making significantly more money than the peers of our generation who didn't go to that war. That was 85%, basically 2.6 million people. Now, there was the 15% that came back, and their brains have been altered, either by stress or by impacts, blast injuries. And once that happens to you, you can't save yourself. You need therapy, you need help. But the services didn't exist then like they do today. That meant that about 400,000 really messed up Vietnam veterans just got dumped out in the public. And because they were all there more or less at once, that's why people began to think, oh, Vietnam, they're those poor homeless guys. You know, they don't realize what a successful generation we were. Any other questions?
Yeah, a couple. We have one about, they wanted more elaboration on women fighters, women Vietnam fighters.
All right, so I'll take that, and then you guys can jump in. The women scared us the most, frankly. I'm going to be just direct about this. When their men would run, the women wouldn't run. They'd stay and they'd fight. They were very good shots, and they were small and they were difficult to hit, and so they would often kill a lot of us before we killed them. Very tenacious. As really, they were the warriors we feared the most. Anyone else want to jump in?
Well, we had, it'd been long, we had a lot of mortars at night, and we had sapper attacks. And they had been very successful at Tet. They blew up a lot of aircraft there. And so we would fly, when weather permitted, we flew a Firefly mission. We had a Cobra in the air along with a flare ship, Huey with flares. And when we would get signals of sapper attacks, we would let out the flares, and then the gunships would open up. Typically, we used for that type of anti-personnel close-in flechette rounds that were sometimes called the beehive round, which you had to be about 500 feet in a certain angle of attack, and you basically would be shooting around that ended up being slivers of metal that you could cover pretty much a football field. And if it hit the body, it penetrated. Well, when daylight came, and we'd had several of these attacks over time. When daylight came, then we would take the security units with the dogs, go out, and we'd have to cut through concertina to get to the bodies that we had shot the night, early morning typically. And in some cases, there were women in the sapper attacks, very small, could get through. Let me bring up photograph 13-1. These are weapons that were with the sappers in one of those attacks. If you look at the top picture, they had a shoulder-fired rocket. This was a rocket that was responsible for taking out a lot of helicopters. Typically, they'd wait till you're about 200 yards or less, and they'd shoot into the rotor system, and you were a rock. The weapons down below are AK-47s, and you'll see the sapper charges and the grenades that were there that they were using in this particular sapper attack. To give you an idea, they were, their mission was to come in and blow up aircraft and hopefully get out of there.
Anyone else have a response, or is there another? We have another question, right? Phil, what do we got?
You mentioned Apocalypse Now, but wondering how the panelists view all the different movies of the war, and if anyone in particular has stood out or held special meaning.
I'm going to open with The Siege at Firebase Gloria. It is the only Vietnam War movie I saw that I thought was anywhere close to accurate. And it has R. Lee Ermey, the guy famous in Full Metal Jacket as the drill sergeant. He plays a Marine sergeant major. They're caught during Tet with a small patrol, desperately needing shelter, and they find a remote, obscure base camp. And everybody's on drugs, and everybody's drunk, and the sergeant major takes over and whips the camp into shape in time to receive this massive attack. Hell of a movie. Siege at Firebase Gloria. Other nominees, gentlemen.
I liked We Were Soldiers Once and Young, and I read the book first. But Hal Moore was a brilliant commander, retired as a general, and we had a mutual friend, and he'd heard a little bit about my story, and I actually connected with him. He was living in Colorado, and he said, "I'd like you to stop by if you're up here." And unfortunately, he passed away. But I guess because of the personal contact that I had with him. But there is a story beyond that. You see some of it in that movie. And there were a couple of helicopter pilots that basically came back and took out wounded and brought in supply time after time. And years later, they were finally recognized with the Medal of Honor for their service. I mean, it was an extraordinary effort. And so I guess because of that personal contact, I appreciated the book particularly, but I enjoyed the film.
Yeah, so I'm standing corrected. You're absolutely right that We Were Soldiers Once and Young in the book is just a tremendous story, a real guy, a real American hero. Interestingly, when we were going into Iraq after 9/11 and Afghanistan, Hal Moore showed up at, now General Hal Moore showed up at West Point and gave a speech about how this was the dumbest thing he'd ever heard of. This is not the way we should be responding to this situation. This is just going to be another Vietnam. And everyone was shocked. The Pentagon was rocked by that. This was the biggest American hero we had. He warned us, and what happened is what happened. Another question.
Any other movies?
Any other movies? Well, you know, in Full Metal Jacket, I love the characterization of the R. Lee Ermey's drill sergeant. He'd really been a drill sergeant. It was over the top, but that's who our guys were trying to be, our drill sergeants. But at the end of the movie, the woman warrior in the building, the sniper, who kills all of the guys, most of the guys in the unit, that to me was very real. And I thought, good God, that's exactly what we were facing. People with that, women with that kind of determination. True patriots.
Yeah, there were. It took me a while. It took me a while to really want to see any of the Vietnam movies. I saw some of them later on, but yeah, We Were Soldiers Once and Young. That was a great one. Full Metal Jacket and you know, Platoon. Some of these were over the top, but they got some things. They got some things right, but they were mostly for dramatic effect. And actually, I was asked to work on as an advisor on Apocalypse Now, but I was not able to do that. I had done some other film work. There was a ABC television movie of the week that I worked on, which was about Vietnam, but it wasn't so much about the war. It was kind of like the aftermath of the war. And it had to do with Paul Winfield was in the movie, Rita Tushingham, the most interesting man in the world, Jonathan Lippy, was in the movie. And it actually wound up winning a couple of major awards. But the theme of that movie was a black ex-GI goes back to Vietnam to try to find a child that he had fathered during the war. And that was the whole, it had to do with the Amerasian children's issues that were really significant after the Vietnam War. Oh, it was called Green Eyes, by the way.
I don't know if any of our audience is either studying or working in marketing. I made a big part of my career in marketing. I ended up later on working for the 4 largest ad agencies in the world. And the only reason I mention that is not to beat my chest, but to say the best education you can get for marketing is to study military tactics. You want to understand how to be an aggressive marketer, you study military tactics, and that will get you there. A lot of the other stuff is highly theoretical and not very effective, in my experience. Not that anybody asked, but and therefore no charge for that advice. Yes, we have a question here.
Thank you for your talk. I was in about the same time you all were, 70 to 74.
Yes.
And what I'm feeling here is that in one regard, we were all young,
Yes.
and the military, the war was exhilarating. Even though it was terrifying in certain regards, it was, in those terrifying moments, if you survived, it was exhilarating. On the other hand, here we are thinking about 54,000 people that died. So you kind of got a juxtaposition of exhilaration on one side and really kind of down on the other side because so many people did not make it. In one regard, when you start assessing this thing, you look at the way we thought as young people, and juxtaposed to how we are stepping forward in the wisdom of age. And given those two positions, the question really needs to be asked: was it worth it?
Can you repeat that to your
Was it worth it?
repeat that to your folks online too? They might not have heard it.
Okay, so given the adrenaline rush of war and the sort of the romance and the excitement of it, juxtaposed to the fact that we had, I think the number was 58,000 casualties, 58,000 largely American boys, but significantly some women serving as nurses and in other roles over there. 58,000 Americans died, and was it worth it? And I'm going to address this question tonight. I have a major story tonight. I'll be on the stage at Rackham talking about this. But the bottom line is that we left. We thought we had lost the war. We came back to no welcome. Not only were there no parades for Vietnam veterans, but God, some of our guys tried to join the VFW and were told they weren't welcome. You guys lost your war. Very shabbily treated. That's why the Vietnam Veterans of America was founded, for veterans who wanted to belong to an organization. Nobody said thank you to your service for 30 years. 30 years. Eventually the Michigan Theater here in Ann Arbor made it free for veterans to go to a movie on Veterans Day, so what the hell, I went. And then I was on jury duty, and there was a police officer who was also on jury duty, and she said to me, after she learned that I had been in Vietnam, she said, thank you for your service. I about fell off my chair, right? In fact, in many cases, you never brought it up. You could talk to other vets about it, but you couldn't talk to general civilian population about it. Either we were baby killers, you know, it's not like we started the war. It's not like, you know, in many cases, a lot of our people didn't want to go. But once I got there, it was, you know, once they were shooting at me, I just tell you, I was shooting back. You know, this was no time to be wandering around with black tights and a skull in my hand like Hamlet. You shoot at me, I'm going to shoot back. It's just how it is. Now, there's an irony here. Two things. This is a fairly elaborate answer. The first is there was a massive Soviet army that was mustered on the border of Europe, and they were going to, in fact, invade Europe and count on the fact that America wouldn't respond. Just didn't have enough boots on the ground in Europe, just didn't have the heart for it because of Vietnam. But they saw the firepower we unleashed over there, and they realized we would just blow them away. And that's in fact what happened in the first Iraq War. They were equipped with the latest Soviet weapons, the latest Soviet tanks. They outnumbered us 4-1. They had been trained by the Soviet army, and that war was over in 100 hours. We cut through them like a hot knife through butter. We were the best army in the world, and we still are. We got better because of what we learned in Vietnam. So we prevented World War III. World War III would have happened, except that and the reason I know this is that the daughter of the general became a PhD in biology and went to work for me several years later in my consulting projects.
The Soviet general.
What?
The Soviet general.
Yeah, the daughter of the Soviet general staged to lead the invasion of Europe, just told me about the whole thing after we got to know one another. And so she was a highly ethical person, I believe her. The second thing that happened is after we left Vietnam, the Chinese invaded Vietnam. We were always afraid they were going to come in after us like they did in Korea, but they didn't. We so freaked them out in Korea. We killed 1 million Chinese in Korea with napalm when they invaded, so they weren't going to come into Vietnam. But when we were gone, they invaded Vietnam, and the Vietnamese kicked their butts in ways that they could never kick ours. They so totally and thoroughly militarily defeated the Chinese that we began to reach out and seek a relationship with the Vietnamese to help keep China in check. And you look at Vietnam today, they are a most favored trading partner. They make excellent furniture, excellent shoes, excellent electronics. Americans are now retiring to Vietnam because the countryside is beautiful. It's very inexpensive. Americans are very welcome in Vietnam, embraced. And I got to tell you, the cuisine is the best in the world. So we got an outcome we didn't expect. What do I make of that? I don't know. But that's what happened. Sorry for the outburst, but I wanted to share.
We made capitalists out of them.
We did.
That's what happened. We made capitalists out of
Yeah, they
them. And
didn't.
now they're a very successful capitalist country, although they're not recognized as such from a governance standpoint, but they are a capitalist country.
Yes,
And that
absolutely.
example was set by the United States.
Right. Do we have another question here?
Oh, I think so. What was the last one? Stories are great. Have any of you written books about your experiences, articles? Are you considering doing so?
Yeah, I've written a book. It has one page. It denies that I was there. No, I haven't, but Ben has written a good book in which his Vietnam service is discussed. Ben, you want to give the title?
Well, there are actually two of them. One was a kind of a labor of love that my wife kind of forced onto me. She would hear tales of this and tales of that, so she wanted me to do an oral history, and she was going to transcribe it. We did that. It covered everything from basically from birth to about the time I entered law school. So probably the first 35 years of my life. And yeah, there were a number of Vietnam stories in that. The other book that I did was related to the TV movie Green Eyes that I mentioned before. Random House Ballantine Books published. I did a novelization of that movie, and I was able to capture a little more in that book than we actually put on the screen in terms of some of the stuff going on in Vietnam right after during the war and right after the war.
So after this panel, I'm going to be encouraging Denny to write a book because he's got an amazing story. I do want to play off something, Joe, you said about the Vietnamese becoming capitalists. This is from direct experience. So I go out with my patrol one day. This was unusual because normally we operated at night. We were hunting them at night, but they were hunting us at night. But this particular time, we went out during the day. Around noon, we got fired at, and we went down in an open rice paddy. We had an earthen dike that we could hide behind. And we couldn't see where the fire was coming from. It's smokeless powder. So we just sprayed the wood line. We had 2 M60s. We had 6 or 7 M16s. We had 2 M39 grenade launchers. And after a while, the guy shot back, and we went down again. And so we're pinned down by a single sniper, and women from the village come out, and they said, "Hey, GI, you want Coca-Cola?" "Oh, Mama-san, you dinky dow." That's crazy. "You dinky dow, diddy mow, get out of here." And the sniper shot at us, and we shot back. We didn't know where he was. And we're going through our water. It's over 100 degrees. It might be 110, 150 degrees, baking in that rice paddy. The women come out again. We're getting a little thirsty. "Hey, GI, you want Coca-Cola?" "Oh, Mama-san, how much?" $5. Well, you convert that to today's money, that's about $40 for a warm 8-ounce bottle of Coke. "Oh, Mama-san, you dinky dow, diddy mow. After another half hour or so, we were out of water. The women came out again. We bought every damn Coca-Cola that village had, and then the sniper went away. This is marketing, by the way. You want to talk about marketing? This is marketing. They were naturals.
My experience in Vietnam, especially when I moved up to Saigon and headquartered in Tan Son Nhut, our unit moved up there, and then later I was was still with MACV, but there was I pegged Vietnamese as being extraordinarily capitalistic, and there was a thriving, huge black market in Vietnam. And for just as an example, I had an apartment, like the fourth floor of a old stucco building, not too far, actually on what was called Soul Alley, which was basically the black GIs kind of gathered there as a community. But I paid for that apartment with a case of beer from the PX every month, and then they would take that and they would translate that into you could always get black market stuff anywhere, and it wasn't secret. It was on the streets, and people would buy the beer, buy the Martell cognac, whatever it was. But I was surprised by how sort of capitalistic the Vietnamese are as a culture. Even from the north, they pick that up. So yeah.
If you read the history, Ho Chi Minh was a great admirer of Thomas Jefferson. He had attempted to form an alliance with us. He was not a member of monolithic communism by any means. Our government thought he was, and so that failed, and it's a tragedy because what Ho Chi Minh wanted, he ultimately got after we left, and after they became a most favored trading partner, and the things that I just cited happened. That is a great irony to the whole Vietnam War, because Ho Chi Minh revered the United States Constitution, and he begged the United States, when the French were still there, to kind of come and let Vietnam become an ally of the United States. And of course, because of the Cold War and everything, that didn't happen. And but for that, the Vietnam War happened. Yeah. So, quick history lesson. It is Charles de Gaulle's fault, when he was Premier of France, that the Vietnam War started. Eisenhower was trying to set up NATO to have a serious deterrent buffer to the Soviet Union's plans to expand. And de Gaulle would not have anything of it if the Americans didn't support the French colony in Vietnam. After all, Michelin tires had rubber plantations, and by God, there better be some American resources in there, or de Gaulle wouldn't support NATO. So Eisenhower rolled his eyes, and we sent in some cursory troops. Eisenhower steps down, Kennedy takes over. He's extremely doubtful about this. He's thinking about getting out, John Kennedy, but he's shot. He's assassinated. That drops it in Lyndon Johnson's lap. He doesn't know what the hell's going on. He doesn't give a good goddamn about Vietnam. He's trying to build the Great Society. That's really his focus. So he's just, take care of this, handle it. He gets a war hero from World War II, William Westmoreland. And Westmoreland keeps asking for more troops, and Johnson keeps sending in more troops. And Johnson gets into the point where he doesn't want to be the first U.S. president to lose a war. So he keeps it going. The whole thing is a colossal mistake. It's just, it didn't need to happen. It was a mistake. And we finally got where we should have gotten after all those people got killed, because you talked quite correctly about the tragedy of 58,000 Americans losing their lives. We killed officially 3 million Vietnamese, and I happen to believe we killed 20 million of them. I mean, what we did over there was just devastating. And I ask you, for what? For what? So, not that there are not times to go to war, there certainly are. I would have been one of the first to enlist in World War II. I can imagine times in the future when, it's not gonna be me, I'm too old. What am I gonna do, fall on the enemy and gum them? But, but there are times when it's worth going to war. We thought at the onset, I think even as Denny and I went in, we were roommates our senior year at college, and even then we thought this was a war worth fighting for. We didn't have the information we got later. I don't know, Denny, how do you feel about it?
I just did an interview recently that I would encourage any Vietnam veteran. We all have our stories, and it kind of reminds me. I wanted to show this earlier, but let's pull up that cartoon, Mary. Yeah. This is my favorite cartoon of the Vietnam War era, and I think. Can you all see that?
Yeah, read us the caption. There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, it puts things in a clear perspective. We all have our different viewpoints based on where we were and when we were there. And I really was reluctant to talk about my experiences for 50 years. I was approached by a person, a Navy captain knew about me and had shared some information with a lead historian at Texas Tech University. And they have a project called the Vietnam Archive Project, and they will interview any and all Vietnam vets, ask about your background and take you up to the current. But the questioning that they pose, and the interviewers are extremely competent PhD historians. And so I'd encourage everybody to reach out. I thought it would take an hour, hour and a half. All you need to do is go into Google Texas Tech Vietnam Archive, and there's a search engine, put in a name, and you can bring up the story. So I guess I told my book 8 hours and 5 minutes. I thought it would be an hour, hour and a half, but we did it in hour increments. And in the course of that, I really, reflected on things I hadn't thought about, and it's completely unedited. Whatever you say is you're on the hook for. But it got me thinking about a lot of things. One topic we didn't discuss to date in extent was morale. And how critical the morale is for people that are in a combat mode day in and day out, like you guys were and I was. And that morale was, number one, was mail from home and writing back and having a touch with our family and our friends. And I was blessed to have a lot of mail. It might be a postcard, and I didn't have much time, so most of my mail back was a postcard with, I'm doing great, here I am, and look forward to being home, or whatever. I didn't get into detail. Another thing was the music. And in answer to that question that you posed, one of the songs of that time was War. And you remember the lyrics, War, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. And that really is what I feel and take home. And I praise the Afghanistan and Iraq veterans that have gone through stuff that at least we're, as Vietnam veterans, we're protecting them. We're not going to let them have to go through what we went through. But Laurie's point is excellent. World War II, the greatest generation. My father fought in the Pacific on an aircraft carrier, you know, that saved freedom for the entire free world. That's worth dying for. And certainly Korea, I mean, look at the difference that has occurred in the division of South Korea and North Korea because Truman had the guts to, we're drawing the line. We get into Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan, you know, it's a whole different spectrum with political history that we now have. What I feel good about, I'll share a brief story that I feel made my entire time there worthwhile. I was involved, a helicopter had been shot down, and a platoon had been inserted to secure the aircraft and try to make sure that the crew got out safely. And the American grunt on point, he got shot pretty badly, and so a medevac aircraft was coming in to extract. And unfortunately, they were taking heavy fire and they had to abort. And I was monitoring the situation. I was off some distance and I asked permission to try because I had a very fast jet turbine scout ship, like a sports car, the Loach. And I went in and I got there. We took a lot of hits. The tracer rounds were coming in, kind of lima green tracers, and the CO told us to abort. And I said, well, by using the minigun, I could keep suppressed, and we were able to lift the guy up into the helicopter. My observer had to get out on a skid because we couldn't land his rice paddy, and we got the guy in the back. And we then, because the aircraft had taken a lot of hits, I didn't have some of my instruments, I just decided to fly low level over to Can Tho. Most of you know where that is, to the field hospital. And as we took off, I asked for a vector above so that I could navigate without having to go to any altitude because I didn't know how long the aircraft's going to fly. When we got to Can Tho, and that was a large airfield, I called in. I said, I have a uniform Sierra. He's bleeding out. We got to get him to the pad. Can I have a direct vector right across the field? And they shut down the entire airfield. And I was able to get to the landing pad. We called in from his dog tags, his blood type, and those doctors, God bless them, and God bless the nurses. They were transfusing him as they were taking him out of the aircraft to put him on a stretcher. He lived. So, no matter what happened, and the people that I saw screwed up and lost, at least I made a difference for one guy.
Well, you made a lot of differences for a lot of guys.
You know, that to me, and the fact that he survived. And I made a point here when I was wounded the third time. First two were relatively minor, but I was laid up for a week with shrapnel in my ass and I couldn't fly. Second time, and got the name Old Magnet ass by the ground crewman because they knew what had happened. But I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate the medical doctors and the staff and those wonderful nurses that took care of me in Vietnam and Japan and the Great Lakes Naval Hospital. And what trauma they had to go through, not knowing what was happening to the patients as they were moved on. And to any of those that might be listening, I can tell you that we never, ever forgot them. And we thank them from our heart.
Wow. So that's a great place to close. I want to thank Joe Schwartz. I want to thank Denny Scoville. I want to thank Ben Cunningham. I'm Lawrence Dolph. In the words of Edward R. Murrow, good night and good luck.